Hey everybody, I hope you're all doing well. I want to apologize right up front for the audio quality of this video. Unfortunately, this mic has been causing me problems and making me sound like a chipmunk with a vocoder in it. Here's a sample.
Gone against this
To fix this
problem is that have more gay characters in the show.
So yeah, really annoying and weird sounding. So unfortunately, I had to use the lesser quality mic for this recording. Apologies, I will have it fixed for my next video, but I do hope you stick around for the entirety of this review despite that, because I really, really loved Andor, and I thought it was so cool, and I have so many things that I want to say. So please excuse the audio problem. I hope you'll stick with it either way, but I am very excited to talk about Andor with you, and I hope you always, my friends, live long and prosper. Hello, interwebs! I am here to review the first 3 episodes of Star Wars Andor that dropped on Disney Plus, the latest Star Wars series that we are getting. And I have to say, I was deeply excited for this show. I know I've said that about and I have to say, Hello, interwebs, I hope you're all doing well, and I am here to review the latest in the long line of Star Wars shows that we've been getting on Disney+. This time, Star Wars Andor, a prequel series featuring Cassian Andor, one of the characters from Rogue One. In my opinion, probably the best Disney Star Wars movie. Not a perfect Star Wars movie by any means. I certainly have my issues, and there are certainly things in that film that I think have become indicative of larger issues that I have with Disney Star Wars, but I do also think that it has the strongest script, and probably the strongest story to tell in and of itself, and that is all because of one Tony Gilroy, who came back to write this series, and that, my friends, is what has me and had me very excited to watch this show. I kind of want to set up a little bit of a discussion around where I think Star Wars is at before I get into the discussion of this series proper, because I think discussing that will allow me to also explain why these first 3 episodes have, quite honestly, got me very excited, not only for the rest of the series, but hopeful for Star Wars going forward in a way that I have not been in a long time. And I deeply, deeply hope that this show is indicative of the direction that they're hoping to take Star Wars. That probably is not the case. We'll talk about it in a second. But also, I really hope that this show is successful because of these reasons. So let me just get started. I actually kind of referred just a second ago to Rogue One, have been indicative of problems that I've had with Star Wars going on. And that is because in Rogue One, we got the Grand Moff Tarkin, as well as Princess Leia, de-aging, resurrection technology that they used for that movie. And that became indicative of a larger problem that we're seeing more and more in shows like The Mandalorian, Book of Boba Fett, where they've used this CGI technology to de-age characters, and it just has this feeling of nostalgia and lack of willingness to do anything new or surprising with interpretations of these characters. They just sort of want to preserve them in amber in a lot of ways, right down to the fact that they used AI for Mark Hamill's voice in Boba Fett, which was deeply creepy. And it just, again, this preservation in amber sort of things. And that became indicative of a lot of what Star Wars also became, just on a large scale way, where you see things like The Rise of Skywalker being this just doing the greatest hits of Star Wars. Things like Book of Boba Fett returning to these characters. Even Obi-Wan, which was a show that I enjoyed for the most part, even though I had issues with it structurally in a lot of senses. It's still this nostalgia and ramping off of that, rather than being willing to push anything forward. And a lot of the shows have just been filling the gaps in of the Star Wars universe without actually trying to take a step forward. I mean, even the sequel trilogy in general that Disney did was, Last Jedi aside, and I have issues with Last Jedi, but not for the same reasons, but that trilogy was just sort of redoing the initial trilogy again, right down to the fact that we had a faux empire in the First Order, despite the fact that the First Order, I know there's been books that have explained it since, but really on its face didn't really make sense a lot of the time. It was just trying to redo the same thing. That's not to say that there hasn't been good in Star Wars to find. While I have found some of that sort of nostalgia baiting evident in The Mandalorian and those sort of shoving action figures together and getting to see oh, look how cool Darth Vader is, or look how cool Luke Skywalker is, moments in those shows. I do think that The Mandalorian overall, when it is doing its own thing and telling its own story and mythology, that's when it's at its strongest. So I haven't think that there's been something wholesale like all wrong with Star Wars, but just stuff that hasn't really gotten me excited. The stuff that got me excited was like Rogue One, where it introduced these characters, took risks with the tone of the storyline. And while again there were those nostalgia things in there, the part of Rogue One had me excited. And like I said, that came down to Tony Gilroy, who is a man who, even going into interviews with this show, has repeatedly said he does not care about Star Wars or hold it precious. And I love that because it reminds me of Nicholas Meyer coming in to do Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, and ending up making one of the best Star Trek movies and ultimately saving that franchise and allowing it to become what it came today. Having someone come in who does not hold this dear, but still wants to tell a good story within this universe and is able to move it forward. Now, the only thing that I have with Andor on its face, just as a concept, is that it is still, just in its place in the timeline, a gap-filling show. In that, like, it's going back and telling a story about a character we've met before. It is set during this Star Wars Episode 3 and 4, which is a well-mined era at this point. But, that being said, the fact that this is not a character that is precious, or that Disney can do anything with going forward, considering what happens to him in Rogue One, as well as the fact that this isn't like a series that is really telling a gap that needed to be filled, or anyone was really super, super intensely curious about in a way that's like, what was Obi-Wan doing at this time, sort of thing, I think allows this to kind of transcend that issue. While it's still there is sort of like the cynical-minded, like I'm sure the bean counters at Disney were thinking that way. For me, it's like that ultimately becomes superfluous to what this story is trying to tell. And for all of those reasons, and now that we are actually getting into this series proper, I was so impressed with this, because what this show is ultimately trying to do, at least in these first 3 episodes so far, is, to me, seeming to showcase what an actual revolution is like, and how it builds, and what it feels like, and what it takes for people to wish to stand up to the Empire and to these authoritarian groups in a real way. As much as I love other Star Wars things, there is a certain grandiosity to them, and that fits the tone of Star Wars. Like, it's going for that space opera feel, where we're dealing with dark and light and these sort of operatic things. But here in this show, and in Rogue One, which shows this, it was evident in that too, it comes to be a little bit grittier and a little bit more banal in a way that Star Wars rarely, if ever, is outside of these projects. But what it allows it to do is actually tell stories that feel less operatic stakes and feel really grounded in what authoritarian fascistic regimes would ultimately look like, and showcase what these rebellions would lead to. And the way that Tony Gilroy and this series depict it is so great. The company that we get, that's sort of the main antagonist, at least for these first 3 episodes, the sort of like company line, you get to see, I loved seeing the inner workings of this. We sort of had this inciting incident where Cassian kills 2 men, basically accidentally, that worked for the company. And it sort of sets off this investigation, and you have our main villain, essentially, for these 3 episodes, I forget his name, but he's played brilliantly. This middle manager kind of guy, similar to Krennic in Rogue One. He is not the guy at the top of the food chain. He's just a dude who, like, has, like, a power trip over just having the minimum amount, like, he wants to showcase that he knows what he's doing, and he can prove himself, even despite the fact that he just has just a slight amount more power than somebody else. But because of that, he wishes to wield it and uses to use any amount that he has to prove himself, to sort of stick up for, like, I'm the middle manager guy. Again, playing up the Krennic stuff. But he ultimately is just kind of like a mediocre man, essentially. He's trying his best to, like, hold on to that fascistic idea and represent the good, strong guy, but he's mediocre at best. And I loved the scene where he's going to the planet to go after Cassian, and he has to, like, give that speech in front of the men, and you get to see the captain or whatever, this guard, like, give a great speech, knows how to inspire his men, get them to laugh and whatever, and he goes up and is like, gives, like, this crappy little speech, and everyone's like, yeah, clap for him, because that's his position. He gets to be the one that everyone, like, kind of, like, sends smoke up his ass, even though, yeah, everyone knows that he was very blah, even himself. And I just love seeing that, like, lack of confidence, like, being masked by his bravado and really wanting to hunt down this guy, leading to all of this. Beyond that, Cassian Andor, I think, is really wonderfully played here. A man who is just like he kind of has that stereotypical thing that like Luke Skywalker had, where he's like, I just want to go out and live my life and get out of here and do something else. But he doesn't have the grand dreams that Luke Skywalker has of like, I want to join the Empire or the Rebellion or like get involved in these grand fights. Cassian just wants to live his life free from the things he's supposed to and told to do. And I love that it's in this essentially this company mining town that we get to see, and it evokes again this like the oppression that these people live under in this very capitalistic authoritarian society. And I like seeing how those things intertwine, by the way, too, that the show does that really well. But the town just feels so lived in as well. Like the characters, there's so many characters that we meet, there's so many things going on, and it feels like there are things going on around these characters rather than them just existing for Andor to show up and talk to them. We kind of got some that feel in Obi-Wan, for example, in the first two scenes on Tatooine in that show, where it felt like people were just there to be around Obi-Wan and to a lesser extent Lars, Owen. Just to be like for them to do things around them, and you didn't get a sense that there was like it felt like a lived-in world as much. Same thing with Mandalorian, and I think, and not to say that those shows don't have good moments of that, but generally that's the vibe. Here though, and I think that it comes from the fact that the way that this is shot is all mostly on location. They're not using the volume or studio productions to be able to shoot this, and it shows. I don't hate the volume all that much, but even in Star Trek Discovery and Strange New Worlds, and then here in Mandalorian and other shows, when they use the volume, it creates these cavernous empty spaces that you can really tell are like, they look cool, but they look very empty. And while that kind of works for The Mandalorian when we have desert planet after desert planet with like things like Tatooine, which gets a bit tiresome in its own sense, other times where it's used, it just makes everything feel empty. But here you get to have the sense that this is a lived-in place, and it just looks so stunning. And I loved it so much. And I was actually shocked that Disney put in the budget for the Andor series of all things. I'm glad for it because I'm excited for the show, as you can clearly see. But it was just, it looked just stunningly gorgeous. Beyond that, I just, again, liked seeing the complexity of the situation. Andor is spending these first few episodes just trying to cover his tracks of this, like, murder that he takes and accidentally got involved in, but he's trying to do other things too. He's like trying to sell this thing that he got, and so it's like it's not just one thing. He's like trying to cover his tracks, trying to sell this thing, trying to set up all this stuff, while also like dealing with the inner like relationship that he's made with everyone in the town. And I just love that it wasn't just like I'm doing this one simple thing. It was just a bunch of trying to things. Like he's just trying to like keep the plates all spinning throughout all of it, and it worked really well. I also loved his subtle characterization here. We have our initial scene where he does have that inciting incident where he does kill those two men, one on accident, the second purposefully. And I liked that it basically kind of juxtaposes nicely with his appearance in Rogue One. Because in Rogue One, he kills an informant right off the bat in that scene, and he seems to have a lot less compunction or problem with it than he does here in this episode. Because in this show, he still does it. He's still that guy. But it shocks him a little bit more. It takes him a little bit longer to make that decision. And it's a subtle thing. He still makes the same choice, but he's less hardened. And I like that that's just a very subtle shift, and you can see the subtle arc in his character. It's a nuanced difference put in the just the nuance of the writing and the nuance of the performance. But it is brilliantly conveyed, especially within that juxtaposition, like I said before. The only like I can give like superficial like critiques here and there, like the romance of the guy, I think his name is Tim, and him having feelings for Bix, but feeling like, oh, Andor might have feelings for her too, and him being a little bit jealous of that, and that's why he turns in Andor. It's a bit tropey. I don't really love these like lover triangle sort of things that ultimately lead to like the bigger problem. It feels a little, like I said, it's not bad. It's not badly done or portrayed here. It's just I've seen it done in similar type of stories to this one. And so it's like, I guess that's like a negative that I could put on this, but it wasn't particularly badly done. It was just Yeah, I've seen it. It's kind of tropey, but you portrayed it well enough. Other things too. I love the like nuance of like Cassian like going to his surrogate mother essentially, and getting to like see her like being worried like the little details matter. Who knows? Who knows this piece of information about us, and they can track you down, and you've made these mistakes. And it all just hinges upon tiny details. I was just loving that. I loved the character of the town, like when the company people show up, everyone sort of bands together, and they have that sort of like ringing bells as both intimidation and also to warn others. The hammers being rung at the beginning of each day, just a little flavor to the town. I thought was really great. Skarsgård, Alexander Skarsgård, who comes in as this weapons dealer who ultimately is there to try and recruit Cassian. I'm sure we'll learn more about him. He gives a really strong performance here. I love his sort of like laid back, like I'm just not trying to attend to myself, and I'm like interested in what's going on and just paying attention and listening to the average person. And his speech at the end, where he does reveals like he's trying to recruit Cassian, presumably the rebellion or something, or proto rebellion of sorts. And he says like, it just rings in your ears, doesn't it? When they order you around, and like this isn't sustainable because people will push back because they can't live like this under this oppression boot. And he's right. But I hope it's going to show the series as it moves forward the messiness, as Rogue One did, the messiness that rebellion movements get caught up in. Like I obviously agree with the rebellion, but rebellions are not always like rah clean, like hands like totally clean good guys, as we saw in Rogue One. And so I'm really trusting him that he's going to be able to do that. But I just love that Skarsgård just sort of like has that like that's what inspires rebellion. Those small like indignities that people constantly have to endure until they really won't anymore. And then we get what we see in this episode with the company of people being killed by the town, or at least being intimidated by them. It was just great. The action looked beautiful in the end. While the show, it's such an interesting comparison to like something like the Rings of Power, which has also had a slow build over the past few episodes, but it hasn't really felt like it had a driving force. While these 3 episodes were certainly a slow build as well, I always felt like they were moving towards something. And it's sort of the difference between like, I'm fine with slow paced stuff, as long as I know that it feels like it's building towards some momentum, that the unfocused nature of the Rings of Power doesn't have as much at this point. Again, that's not knocking like the Rings of Power overall. I enjoy that show. I have issues with it, but I enjoy it generally. So I don't want to make that a whole argument within this review. But just the slow pace of these episodes just building towards the big event at the end of the 3rd one, really I thought worked very, very well and made the 3 episodes feel like a mini movie. Honestly, like if I watched this as like a mini film, I would have been terribly disappointed. I would have felt like, oh, maybe it could have been a bit grander in the Star Wars universe, just a hair and expounded out a little bit more. But it would have worked as its own mini feature, and I would have been totally pleased with that. Trying to think, is there anything else that I wish to say about the show? Just generally, again, all the small details. The droid that like had to power up to lie was cute and added a little bit of humor to an otherwise fairly dark show. So at least there's tonal variation, which was good. The guy, this was just an interesting note. The guy who was that middle manager dude whose name I forget off the top of my head. He looked like Agent Cooper from Twin Peaks. So just got a little fascist Agent Cooper going on here, or at least corporate Agent Cooper. Yes. The small other things too were like the guy who led the team saying like, oh well, they can lodge an official complaint, and everyone sort of laughs because they know that like they could do whatever they want, and the official complaint won't go anywhere or do anything. Again, little small corporate stuff that I like. I love seeing that like little nuances in how these things are understood. The only other thing too is I'm glad they didn't kill Bix. I was worried that they were gonna kill the girl to like motivate Andor later on. It's like, oh, my girl from back home's now dead, and I'm gonna have anger at the Empire to go and fight them now because the girl died. And I'm glad that they didn't fridge her. At least in this episode. She may die in future episodes, but they didn't fridge her here, so I was at least pleased with that. Sad to say that I get pleased when they don't do that. But yeah, that's not a knock against this show, just maybe a knock against other ones. Yeah, that's what I have to say. Andor, first 3 episodes, really great. I'm excited to see this going forward. Hopefully this show, even though it's being made by Disney, because it is a sort of more under the radar show than like Obi-Wan, for example, they are actually able to be subversive with the story that they are telling. I know that might be thinking a little bit too much and a little bit too hopeful with a Disney-produced piece of media, which will ultimately probably be stamped down in some way. But for right now, if the show continues on this path, I think it might be one of those shows that just flies under the radar enough and has an anti-hero-esque character and a character that Disney does not care as much about, then they might actually be able to spend the Disney bucks to make a really subversive story. Again, maybe I'm being too hopeful, but screw it. Star Wars is all about hope. So I'll end there. What did you think of Star Wars Andor? I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments below. Beyond all of that, thank you so much for being here. I hope you always, as always, my friends, live long and prosper.